Welcome to this book conversation with my friend Adrianne Wagner. And Adrianne brought this wonderful book to my attention, and it's called Find Your Unicorn Space by Eve Rodsky. And I just thought, as soon as I read page one, I said, oh my gosh, we have to have a conversation about this book, you and I. And it's such a great book for people for so many reasons, and we're going to kind of go through that in this conversation. But
Awesome.
welcome. Thanks
Yeah.
for joining me. And you and I are at very different stages of life. So I thought that would make this conversation about this book really interesting. So can you share with people kind of what stage of life you're in right now?
Oh gosh. Yeah. I would say that I'm in the middle. I believe they call it midlife. and they're not wrong. Some might even say I'm having a midlife crisis, but I'm trying to reframe it and not think of it so much as a crisis as an opportunity. And so yeah, I am.
How old are your kids?
My kids they range in ages 4, 6, 17, almost 18, and 20. And so there's a big range in our household, lots of feelings. I recently, in the last couple of years, I kind of crossed a big milestone and turned 40. And my career had been a long one. And so I'm kind of in this, what I'm dubbing as my career halftime, the middle section, I like to call it, and thinking of what I want to do next in my career. I've had a lot of really wonderful things happen so far, and I want the second half to be just as great, if not better than the first. So I'm a mom, I'm a volunteer, I'm a community member, I'm enjoying a new exploration into the world of executive coaching. And yeah, there's a lot of richness to my life, and I'm so excited to have found this book to learn how it can even be better.
I love that you did a full stop at your career, and
Yeah.
you wrote to me and said Sarri, I'm doing a halftime break.
Yeah.
This is it. I'm changing direction and I'm taking time to really reflect, and I'm gonna think about what I want to do next. And
Yep.
you've been in healthcare for
16, 17 years.
yeah, that's a whole
Yeah.
career right there.
Yep.
And and you're just entering your 40s. I
Yeah.
was with you on your birthday, in fact.
You were.
Okay, so my stage of life, for those who don't know, I'm 62. My kids are all grown, and my youngest, my twins, are in their mid-30s. All my kids are 4 years apart total. So my youngest are in their mid-30s, and my oldest is in their late 30s, and then I have 6 grandkids.
Wow.
So at 62, I'm in a very different stage of life than you are in. And I thought that that would be interesting about this book, Finding Your Unicorn Space. And I do want to disclose to everyone that I've known Adrianne for a very long time in her career, and she's known me. And we just had a unicorn space experience together in France, which we're not going to get totally into, but because none of you were there. But it was about sharing a very joyful, playful, creative time. And that's what the Unicorn Space book is about. It's about finding your creative time and your joy and doing things, but doing them also with others, sharing them in that way. So we just had a unicorn space experience before I even heard of this book. And then you told me about this book. So tell me what has struck you the most from this book? What has been your big takeaway from the book?
Yeah, so I actually read the book on the way home from France, and it was recommended to me before I leave, and so I put it on my Kindle. And as I was flying home on a couple of very long flights, I broke this book open and started really diving in, and it was almost like they wrote a book about our experience and about this real intentional time that you take for yourself, and that is really, I think, at least for myself, the key to fulfillment. And that's actually part of the definition that Eve Rodsky uses in her book. She talks about how this is the active and open pursuit of self-expression in any form. It doesn't have to be art. It could be another creative form or an outlet, but it requires, there's some attachment to values, your personal values. And then there's purposeful sharing and this community thing that you talked about, and finding other people to share this joy with. And it's different than happiness. So I think that it's not doing things that make us happy all the time, but it's really about reconnecting with what makes you you and what brings out the best version of you by having that something special that only you can do uniquely on your own. And she does make a very interesting distinction, which I think is kind of what I took out of it the most, is that this is something to be separate from your, she calls them the 3 Ps, your parenthood, your partnerships, and your profession. So this is, and I think that was something for me, that I had a wonderful family, wonderful career. I still have some conversations with folks about, why did you give up a perfectly good job? I feel like I'm having a conversation about jumping out of a perfectly good airplane. And making this like intentional space, because it just unlocks something different than any amount of self-care or friendships or those sorts of things. You can certainly overlap a little and have this be a part of that, but it's just different. It's unique. It's like a unicorn.
The unicorn space, the unique space. You know, one of the things that struck me in the book really very deeply was she asks you to come up with your why, about why you're choosing this particular thing. Like for me, my unicorn spaces are really about creativity and artfulness in a lot of different forms. And from soul collage to watercolor, spinning, knitting, a lot of that is in my unicorn space, as well as swimming. And I also share those things, which is what she talks about, that social piece of it. But my why of those things goes really deep for me. And it is about having time for this childlike playfulness that has nothing to do with trauma. You know, and in my own childhood growing up, there was a lot of trauma around me. And so that was very, you know, even though I had a playful childhood, that trauma was always present in my childhood. And so it's very nice for me now to have playful space that doesn't have trauma within it. And I protect that space, and I like being in that space, and I give myself permission to have that space. And I love that she talked a lot about in the book how you give yourself permission, but also how you navigate as a couple. So have there been things that you have used that have helped you kind of navigate this with your husband around the space that you need to take?
Yeah, I feel like this last 6 months, my career halftime journey has been kind of a lesson in navigating different points in our careers, different values that we each have. And we've started having those intentional conversations about why I need this and why I need this time and what he can do best to support me in getting the time. Because I think at the beginning, and I was reflecting the other day on the self-care wheel that we did together at the beginning of the year, and my barrier to self-care, which is a little different than this unicorn space, was this the question I think that was asked was what's keeping you from your self-care. And it was about this concept. I explicitly wrote the words negotiating childcare time with my husband so that I could do my thing. And I had, after reading this book, I had to think of this differently, because it wasn't that I was negotiating and that there was a trade-off, mine or his kind of thing, because I think that was the guilt that was really haunting me. But instead thinking of it as, this is time for me to get reconnected and grounded in who I am so that I can be their very best mom, his very best wife, the very best coach, the very best person, friend, daughter, whatever my role is. And doing that and starting to think about, well, what does he have in terms of unicorn space?
Mhm.
And how can I start making space for him so that he can get back to a creative outlet that makes him feel like his very best and something that's productive, because it's been a long 3 years of pandemic. And I think he's gotten away from a lot of that and is still kind of in this survival mode phase of his life. So just reconsidering that it's not a give take, it's a balance, and it's something that we can both benefit from. And the book talked a lot about that when you're having conversations, that if you were to have this uninterrupted time, your partner in life, your partner in parenting, your partners at work, they need it too. And you need to find ways to support that. It's very symbiotic.
Yes. And I always say it's also very contagious.
Yes.
So once one of you starts doing it, the other person in the partnership does start wanting it.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that I notice with couples is how sometimes one partner is having that space for the things that really fill them up and refill them, and how the other partner doesn't, resents it, but doesn't seem to know how to ask for it or how to
Yeah.
create it for themselves. And so I love in this book that she breaks down very specific steps and tells you exactly what you and your partner can do together and how to have conversations where both of you are participating
Yeah.
to really start opening into what you really need and how to create the time and support each other to have that time rather than have resentment
Right.
with each other. And I thought that part of the book offers a lot to couples. So if you're a couple and you're reading this, maybe you want to also ask your partner to read it and have these kinds of conversations. But even if your partner is not a reader, one of you can use the tips inside this book and you can follow them sort of step by step, which I really appreciated. I thought that was
Yes.
one part of me is reading it, for the joy of I've had unicorn space for a long time, just didn't call it that. And I love her word for it, because it stands out differently than self-care. It's
Mhm.
a piece of self-care. I've always considered that a piece of self-care is how you fill up. But one of the places where people get stuck, and I want to know how you dealt with this, and she talks about this in the book too, is there are people that they get the time, they get the space, and then they say, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know
Mhm.
what's fun anymore. I haven't been doing these things for so long. I don't even know what I want to do. Did you go through anything like that?
Kind of. I had to really think hard about what my definition of unicorn space would be. I had just discovered watercoloring thanks to you. And so that was kind of the easy, like, oh, this is unicorn space. But then I started realizing there's other things that give me that flow, that enjoyment, that feeling like if I don't get to do this, I'm missing out on something.
Mm.
And so some of my other examples were things like gardening. And so when you reframe something like gardening and put it in terms of this is time I get to spend by myself, I'm growing something, I'm making something, things that are beautiful, things that are healthy, things that enrich me. And it can get to a meditative state instead of just a chore. I think
Oh, yeah.
that
People that
crossover.
love gardening do not see it as a chore.
No, but I think at some points when my garden gets overwhelmed, just like when I'm overwhelmed or when I'm having burnout sorts of things, the act of watering or just like even that like all or nothing sort of mentality that if it starts getting
Mm.
weedy, I give up kind of thing, or if something dies, I kind of throw in the towel, and really reframing it and thinking of what can I do to build in time every morning to spend with my garden, not in my garden, but with my garden, and
Mm.
have that sort of thing. It's really something that I crave when I'm gone. I crave when it's not, something's not growing. I love the newness of seeing something new every single day. It looks different.
Mm.
By no, yeah, and only I think we've talked about this too, is that the things that the value that I associate with my unicorn space is this beauty, nourishment, that sort of thing, doing something that's good in community and humanity. I think those are breathing fresh air. I think like those are the things that really tie me to the unicorn space that I keep. And then the other one that I was thinking of that I didn't consider unicorn space, but is really around community and eating and cooking
Oh,
and building that building beautiful foods and that are both good and good for you and exciting. I love trying new recipes, that sort of thing. So all of those kind of tie into all of that feeling of what do I crave? What do I yearn for? What do I get the most out of and feel
I,
most me?
I love what you're saying, because what you're also saying is once you get a taste of your unicorn space, once you
Mhm.
experience the experience, like you were saying, like in watercolor, you could then take it and say, what else gives me that feeling?
Yeah.
And what, and then you said, well, you know, when I let my garden grow, it just goes out of control. It doesn't give me that feeling. And you're like, but if I tend to it every day and it tends to me,
Yeah.
then we're in this relationship. And you're saying, when I'm in a relationship with my garden, it's very fulfilling. When I'm in a relationship with what I'm getting to cook, it's very fulfilling.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a hint. And what I see for people that haven't let themselves do their joyful thing or given themselves the time, the very first time that they do it, they then complain to me and say, Sarri, that wasn't very fulfilling. You know, I took that, you know, class and it wasn't fulfilling. It didn't, it was hard and it was challenging. And at points I was bored. And you know, it's like anything else. If you've neglected this part for so long, you can't expect the first moment that you go and do it for it to be fulfilling. Like I do
Mhm.
cold water swimming, right? But I like to do it really more like spring, summer, early fall. But someone was just asking me about cold water swimming the other day, and you know, he wants to give it a try for the first time. And I thought, you know, the first time you get in, it's not necessarily very fulfilling. It's freezing. And if you're, even if you're in a wetsuit and everything else, there's still a lot to learn about which kind of wetsuits keep you the warmest and how you stay comfortable in the water and how long you want to be in there and watching out for whales and things going by and how you're safe. You know, there's just like a lot to think about. Is the sun hitting the water at that time? Where is the tide? But it could be overwhelming to think about all those things at first, all at
Mhm.
once. And maybe the first few times you get in, it's not
Yeah.
very fulfilling. It's challenging. And so how do you get from the, this isn't making me joyful, this is challenging me, to stay with something a little bit and like you're saying with the garden, like if you go in when it's all overgrown, this isn't joyful. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's a really good question. I think there are absolutely days where I will fail at doing unicorn space or building time for unicorn space. And I try to give it, in any way, if there's a way to um, reach the point where it becomes a habit, and which so it takes work, and it doesn't. I think it. My goal in my unicorn space is not to create a masterpiece every single day. It's to either put pen to paper or watercolor to paper at least once throughout the day. It could be 10 minutes, it could be 5 minutes of drawing. But it unlocks something and it gives me something to look forward to. If I want to go back and paint that, or I want to go try a new way to do it. So I think there's a way to break that doldrum or pattern of feeling a little
Yeah.
defeated by it. And microdosing is not the right word, but that's the first word that comes to mind.
That
Um,
is the right word. You're right.
and
It's like make it
it's a
smaller.
small, yeah, make it
Baby
smaller
steps.
and be
Baby
proud of
step
it
it.
and reframe it in a way that you can be proud of. That I
Just like you go to yoga. right? I
Yes.
know that about you. You go to yoga. Now, the very first time you go to yoga, it may not be very fulfilling.
Yeah.
It may be
It
challenging.
actually hurt.
It hurt, right? And
Yeah.
very challenging. So what turned it into continuing to go a unicorn space? It must have been part of your why that you kept going.
You know, for me, it was actually this community, and also that I felt better having gone. So I think exercise is a really good example, because oftentimes you'll wake up in the morning, it's dark, you don't want to do this, it's cold, whatever excuse you come up with. But
I call it not asking myself for my opinion.
yeah,
If I
good.
ask myself,
If
I'll
you
vote
ask,
myself
of
out of it
course,
every time.
yeah,
But
you
I
would
say,
make a
I'm not
different
asking, we're
choice.
going.
And then when you're like, I've never once gone to yoga and afterwards felt regretful about that time spent. Like, it's always like, I worked something out, and even though I'm sore right now, that must have been my body telling me that I needed to stretch that particular muscle, or do
I
something
love
different.
this tip that you're giving
So
everyone.
so
What you're
that they,
saying is sometimes it's how you feel after you've done it.
yes, and remember that feel. It's kind of like childbirth. Like, no one, if all you remembered was the pain, no one would have any more babies, and we wouldn't be here right now. But if you think about like that feeling afterwards, and that feeling of non-regret and thankfulness that you did it, then you would choose it again. And so holding on to that positive emotion, rather than all of the possible negative emotions that might stand up in front of you, or in front of the door to get you out there,
Yeah,
I
and
think is
I
good.
think we cannot like demand our joy to show up
Right.
because we've been neglecting it. It's that garden example that you're saying,
Yeah.
it is beautifully planted, but if it's let to go to weeds, you can't go in and demand it look better or give you joy without working through it. And
Yep.
that's one of the takeaways I really want people to have from this conversation. If you have neglected your joy or your fulfillment or the things that would be in your unicorn space, that you can't come to it initially with a lot of demands. People
Right.
say to me, oh, Sarri, I tried meditation once, and my mind was still just as crazy and busy afterwards. In fact, it was worse during it. It was like, well, you build an internal buffer when you meditate. It takes time. Like, you have to be doing it over time to get the benefit out of it. And the
Right.
same may be true for whatever your unicorn space is. Maybe some of you are lucky and you do your activity and it gives you joy immediately, that rush of joy. But for some of you, it may not give you the rush of joy right away. It may be the neglected garden that needs some tending to, and eventually that starts building up, and then you start getting something back from it that you were looking for. But you can't
Yep.
go in and do this as on demand, especially if you've neglected that part of you for a very long time. It's going to take time.
Yep.
So let me see. There is an emphasis in this book on the importance of sharing your unicorn
Yeah.
activities. Can you talk about that and how you're
Yeah.
doing that?
Yeah. I think I didn't really think about this too much, but there definitely have been lots of creative outlets in my life. And I've always kind of been a creative person. When I've found my, I think there's like a little bit of a dopamine response, where you get, you get it only when you let it out. And if you don't, if I drew something beautiful or painted something beautiful and kept it to myself, I could go back and look and I would feel proud and whatnot. But there's something very different. And I think there's entire like social media platforms that are based on this feeling of sharing it with other people and getting the feedback that, wow, you're actually pretty good at this. And then it makes me want to do it more. And it makes me want to try new things. It makes me want to adventure more. And that sharing in unicorn space also, it's almost like sharing that part of you that makes you you. So you can't,
Mm.
with all of the things, all of the
Oh,
different
what
ways
you
that I
just
know
said is
people.
critical.
Absolutely. All the people that know me with a certain hat on, a certain lens on. and they could know nothing about my unicorn space and think that they understand me. But once you see something that I've drawn or something that I've cooked or gardened or grown on my own, then people kind of stand up a little straighter and say, oh, like that is a whole different dimension of you that I had no idea existed. And it's absolutely a positive emotion that gives back to me to say, yeah, that's me. I'm very multidimensional. And
Oh my
I'm a
gosh,
multi-hyphenated person.
the word that's coming to my mind as you're talking is whole personhood.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's whole person living, right?
Yes.
Where people also see you as a whole being
Yes.
and know you that way, and you get to know them that way. And I think in her book, she's also talking about the value of sharing your thing in a way that others can do it with you.
Yeah.
Like whether it's, I know you've been teaching me the art of the butter board.
Yes.
Having a butter board. Like I keep thinking about that. I keep looking for like the right board. I keep thinking about what I'm going to mix into my butters. And I got that from you. And, you know, I'm still kind of in the dreamy phase of how am I going to put together this butter board for whatever activity you and I pull people together for next. And I can see it, you know, I know we're going to do like a craft day at my house, and but I know there's going to be this butter board that we've been talking about. And so it's just that idea of, yes, sharing on social media, that is definitely an option for people. And there's also, she talked about like having Zoom dates with people where you share, and but there's also coming together.
Yeah.
And there's that social aspect of self-care that I have been talking about for a long time with people. Like the research really shows that, you know, we are social creatures, just like horses, you know, they're herd animals. They have to be with others. And human beings, even if you're an introvert, there are some social aspects to being human that
Yeah.
are about connectivity. And so this is a beautiful way to connect to others through a part of you that doesn't have to be about work, right?
Yep. Definitely. It's when I think about that in that community piece, it also shows up in the book, the Burnout book, Unlocking Your Stress Cycle, by the Nagotsky sisters, that there's this piece of you need to connection to purpose, which Unicorn Space gives us, connection to people. Like these are the protective elements that help you guard against future burnout or recover from burnout. It's not the self-care and rest. You need self-care and rest. Those are just like kind of ingredients or sprinkles. But if you also build in that piece of community and connection, you want to get up the next day and try again, even when you've had a bad day. These are kind of the restorative practices that come only when you have other people to share.
Right, right. And, you know, there is some sort of combination of these that has to be the right fit for who you are.
Yeah.
Because like I said, some people are introverts and they don't get a lot out of that. That feels draining. But it's about finding what is the right combination for you, even if what you need socially is maybe smaller than what someone like me or Adrianne need socially, which might be larger. But it's getting that combination that's right for you, kind of dialed into that part of the element. And, you know, the other thing around burnout, since you've kind of brought it up, I wish a lot of people understood, is that there's a lot of research on how unexpressed grief is also part of burnout. And, you know, how people just sort of keep a lid on it. And particularly in healthcare, human services, and education, those of us who have been in the people serving work for a long time, we also witness things that can give us a lot of grief. And it's about having spaces where you can also express that in some way. And that's different than kind of what's in the unicorn book. But like you put all these pieces together, there's so much out there in terms of research at this point about what helps us, what protects us. And you just kind of put together the package that you notice really works for you. And I'm excited about this book. I love that you shared it with me and said, read this book. It was like your enthusiasm was so high about it. You were like, you're going to love every page of this book. And you know what? On every page of this book, I have highlighted something.
Yeah.
It is absolutely a treasure. So any final thoughts you want to share?
No, I want to just real quick touch on the fact that the audience that you share with doesn't have to be, you don't have to host an art show in order to be sharing this work. And someone recently, so I brought my drawing practice to my recent coach training and
Oh,
shared it with
yes,
my
share about
cohort.
that.
And so we have a cohort of 20 budding coaches, executive leadership coaches that are in this cohort with me. And we were offered an opportunity to share a restorative practice in the morning before class started every day. And so I took something that you gifted me, this way to draw or to become an artist, even temporarily, if that's what it was, and taught them how you can have meditation through drawing something simple. And we chose leaves as our subject. And it was beautiful because I could give them examples about how the leaves were not perfect and neither did their drawing need be. And it took a room full of type A perfectionists to a whole different place in their work. And the feedback that I got from one person in particular, a dear friend of mine who has a child who's also 6 years old, afterwards, she was so proud of the leaf that she drew in our class and
Don't
said
you
that
love
when
seeing that? It's like a
oh
little kid
gosh,
standing up taller.
it was amazing. And the question I started the class with was, or the practice with was, how many artists do we have in the room? And only one person raised their hand, but he was more like a musician. And then I said, well, what would this look like if you were to ask a room full of kindergartners the same question? And everyone agreed, everyone would have their hands up. And so she took what she took away from the lesson and that prideful feeling that she had after she created something all on her own that she didn't think she could possibly do, is she took it to her, she took it home with her and shared this with her daughter, her 6-year-old daughter. And she told me later that, and she told the group that she reconnected in a brand new way with her child over this drawing. And that, like, holy moly, like that was that was it for me, that was her audience. That's who she needed to connect with. And same for me. I've shared it with my son, who is an amazing artist. He
I love
is
looking at
just,
his work.
he is so creative, and his brain, how it works, I have no idea. But now when he's seen me draw and watched me paint and I've shown him the work that I've done, and he is like blown away. And to have another person who I consider an artist say, this is really beautiful art, Mom, that's all the sharing that I needed really. And I think the same was true for my friend. So I think that is like, that's the community sharing piece, that it doesn't have to be really big to have an impact, and to make you want to do more of it. Half of my art book is filled with pictures of Godzilla now. And I've painted a number of them, and it's like that, flowers and food, like those are the things that I paint. But it's the part that I'm kind of most proud of, because it's something with someone that I love, and it inspires him, and I hope he doesn't stop being an artist as a result.
Oh, it's going to make me cry. You've brought up so many important points. One that you've brought up is how you're already using it as a coach for executives, and you already had the experience of just tapping right into doing it with them and seeing the impact. So, my question was going to be, how are you going to use this in your practice as a coach with executive coaching? And you've already shared, like, you've already done it. Like, this is how you do it, is you do it with people and let them take the experience where they take it to, and have that aha moment with them, because what they do with it when they experience it is their own thing.
Yeah.
So, I used to do tons of art with my kids when they were growing up. And I've been saying for a while, the problem is my kids outgrew me. And they're like grown up and they're like professional artists and they do their thing, right? And they're,
Yeah.
you know, doctors, and they do their art thing, and it's very high level. And I have to find, and had to find, other people to play with, because what I realized inside was my kids outgrew wanting to sit and do that with mom. And I love that space. So I started doing it with others like you, right?
Mhm.
Is like, as long as I can, and I see that little spark of a little kid light up in somebody's face, and it's like, oh, that's the spark. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know what that
Yeah.
is. That's the joy of it. And interestingly, once I gave up, like, sort of expecting my kids to play with me this way, I got invited to go to an art class with one of my kids. So it was
There
like,
you go.
I've been waiting for so long. This is so fun to be in a unicorn space again. So
Yeah.
I get it. This is where the magic is. But I'm really excited that you are in your early 40s. You just entered your 40s. And I am really excited about what's ahead, because I can see for you, Adrianne, that what you're going to be offering people, what's available to offer people. Um, you know, like, there's a lot of really good research now on all of this. And I can see that you're going to be able to integrate it and really take it to a whole new level with your clients as you work with them. And you've been doing the thing that I think is most important, which is embodying it yourself
Mhm.
first,
Thank you.
right?
Yeah.
Because you can't possibly, I hate seeing somebody very overwhelmed coaching other people,
Yeah.
because it's like, how are you going to help them if you're so overwhelmed? Like, what, how does that even work? Like, you know, it's like going to the doctor who smokes cigarettes, and you're like, what are you going to tell me about health? Right? It's like, you just, you know, it just doesn't connect. And so I think that for those who are coaching and supporting others in any way, that you also have to be the thing that you are. And doing these practices takes time. It
Mhm.
means stepping away from the life as you know it, even for a while. I remember I once took a year and a half off. Um, and that stepping away and kind of regrouping and trying different things and healing from within allows you to bring this work to people in a very embodied way, because they look at you and they can see that you actually do this. They catch you doing it.
Yeah. The amazing thing that, to answer somewhat the question on how do you incorporate this into the coaching, my answer is accidentally. I have, and not necessarily with intention all the time, but I had a client last night, and we had an hour-long conversation about future career and path and whatnot. And at the very end, she said to me, she said, I also wanted just let you know that based on our first conversation, you asked me a question about what I could be doing if I wasn't doing this. And I talked about my writing. And I was so interested in understanding what happened to that part of me that I signed up for a writing retreat in November. And now I have all of these months to really be thinking about how will I, get ready for this writing retreat. And she lit up, and it was like our time was ending. I'm like, I want to talk about that more. But it was really that will be her unicorn space. And I didn't realize that I knocked on that door or tapped into that, but I did, just through inquiry and understanding, trying to understand what made her her in our first session. And so it's everywhere. And it really is about, for people that are overwhelmed or trying to go through transition in their life, reconnecting with that part of you that might be just kind of buried under a few piles of mail is not a bad thing to do. And if you want that real fulfillment and purpose back in your life.
You know, I had that same thing happen here at age 62.
Mm.
A buried part came out, and it was through inquiry. I was
Mhm.
working with an art teacher who made me fill out a form, which I'm like, why do I have to fill out a form? This is to work with this artist. But okay. And on it, she asked, um, what what do you want to do with your art? Like, what is your goal or vision with it? And I was like, I don't have any goals. It's just for me, for journaling, for fun, blah, blah, blah. And then I went
Yeah.
to sleep.
Yeah.
And I woke up at 2 a.m. and my soul was like, go back to fill out that form. I have a different answer. And I
Mm.
wrote down, I've always wanted to do children's books. And it was such a long held, buried dream
Yeah.
that I wasn't even conscious of it when I was filling out the form. And then I
Yeah.
got up and I was like, 2 o'clock in the morning. Do I dare write this down? Do I dare say this out loud? What? You know
Yeah.
nothing about writing children's books. So I signed up for a class and then another, and I've been taking classes and learning how to write children's books because I know I don't know how to do it. I know that there's like a learning process, but at 62, just through what you're saying, that line of inquiry
Mhm.
became, it's if you can be that truthful with yourself, which your client was,
Mhm.
and she deeply thought about it and saw there really was something there. And I had that very same experience. So I know exactly what you're talking about. This is an essential part of coaching.
Mhm.
What you're describing is inquiry and how you ask questions that take people inside.
Yep.
And I know that you are gifted at that. And so I am so excited that you are a coach and your contact info is there. And if people want to explore this part of themselves or are curious based on our conversation, and maybe you pick up the book, or maybe you decide diving in with Adrianne would take you somewhere closer on this journey that you're looking for, I really want to recommend that you pursue that.
Excellent. Thank you.
So thank you for this conversation.